One smile from a stranger changed everything. In 3 days, she taught me how to live, then disappeared forever. James had always been the type of guy who liked things predictable. Every Friday evening, you could find him at the same downtown cafe, sitting in the same corner spot, drinking the same black coffee and working on his laptop. It wasn't that he was boring or anything. He just felt comfortable with routine, safe, controlled. After everything he'd been through in life, having some stability felt good. That particular Friday started like any other. He'd finished his day job around 6, grabbed his laptop bag and headed straight to the cafe. The place had this cozy vibe that he loved, dim lighting, the smell of fresh coffee, and just enough background noise to help him focus. He ordered his usual from the counter, exchanged the regular small talk with the barista who knew his order by heart, and made his way to his favorite table in the corner. He had a deadline coming up. A client needed some design work by Monday, and James wanted to get ahead of it. That's how he operated, always planning, always ahead of schedule, never leaving things to chance. He opened his laptop, pulled up his files, and got to work. Around him, the cafe buzzed with the usual Friday night crowd. College students cramming for exams, couples on dates, groups of friends laughing over shared desserts. James barely noticed any of it. He was in his zone about an hour past, maybe more. Time had this way of disappearing when he was focused on work. He was deep into adjusting some color schemes when he heard a voice. It cut through his concentration like a bell ringing in a quiet room. "Is this seat taken?" James looked up, a bit annoyed at first. There were plenty of empty tables scattered around the cafe. Why would someone need to sit at his table? But the moment his eyes met hers, his irritation melted away. Standing there was a woman about his age, maybe late 20s. She had dark hair pulled back loosely, warm brown eyes that seemed to sparkle with some kind of mischief, and this presence about her that was hard to describe, confident but not cocky, comfortable in her own skin in a way that made you want to know more. But it was her smile that really caught him. Not a polite passing smile, not one of those half smiles people give strangers. This was bold, direct, the kind of smile that said she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care if it made you a little uncomfortable. It was the kind of smile that made you pay attention whether you wanted to or not. No. No, it's free," James managed to say, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. His brain was still trying to catch up with what was happening. She sat down with this easy grace, placing her cup of tea on the table between them. She didn't pull out a phone or a book. She just sat there, completely present, and looked at him with those knowing eyes. "I'm Maya," she said, extending her hand across the table. Her handshake was firm, warm, and she held his gaze the entire time. It was slightly intimidating and completely intriguing all at once. "James," he replied, suddenly very aware that his hand was probably a bit sweaty. He quickly pulled it back and wiped it on his jeans under the table, hoping she hadn't noticed. "So what are you working on, James?" she asked, nodding toward his laptop. She leaned back in her chair, completely relaxed, like they were old friends catching up rather than total strangers. James glanced at his screen, at the half-finished design work that had seemed so important just moments ago. "Just some freelance work, graphic design stuff, nothing too exciting." "Nothing too exciting," she repeated, that bold smile returning. "You say that like you've convinced yourself it's true." The comment caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, leaning forward slightly, "design is about creating something, right? About making things beautiful or functional or both. That sounds pretty exciting to me." "Unless you don't think so anymore?" James didn't know what to say. She was right in a way. He'd gotten so caught up in deadlines and clients and paying bills that he'd forgotten why he'd gotten into design in the first place. When had work become just work instead of something he actually enjoyed? Before he could formulate a response, Maya continued, "Sorry, that was probably too direct. I have this bad habit of asking real questions when I should probably just stick to small talk about the weather." "No, it's okay," James said, and he meant it. There was something refreshing about her directness. "I guess I don't think about it that way much anymore. It's just become routine." "Routine," Maya said, tasting the word like it was something sour. That's a dangerous word. Routine is comfortable, sure, but comfort can turn into a cage if you're not careful. Who was this person? James found himself wondering. People didn't usually talk like this to strangers in cafes, but somehow it didn't feel weird. It felt natural, like they were having a conversation they were supposed to be having. "So what do you do?" James asked, genuinely curious now. His laptop sat forgotten between them, the screen slowly dimming into sleep mode. "I'm a photographer," Maya said, her eyes lighting up in a way that made it clear she loved what she did. "Travel photography, mostly. I just got back from 3 months in Southeast Asia. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. Just got back last week, actually." 3 months, James repeated. "That's a long time to be traveling," Maya shrugged. "Time is relative. 3 months can feel like forever or like nothing at all, depending on how you're spending it. Those 3 months felt like 3 weeks to me because every day was different. New places, new people, new experiences. No routine." There was that word again. Routine. She said it like it was the enemy, and James was starting to wonder if maybe she had a point. She told him about her travels, not in that annoying, braggy way some people talk about their trips, but with this genuine enthusiasm that made you feel like you were there with her. She described the floating markets in Thailand, the ancient temples in Cambodia, the street food in Vietnam that was so good it made her cry. She talked about the people she'd met, the mistakes she'd made, the moments that had surprised her. James found himself completely drawn in. He asked questions, lots of them, and Maya answered each one with the same energy and openness. She wasn't just talking at him. She was sharing something real, inviting him into her world for these moments. Before he knew it, an hour had passed. His coffee was cold, his work untouched. The cafe had gotten more crowded, the noise level rising with the Friday night energy, but it all faded into background static. All James could focus on was Maya and her stories and that bold smile that kept reappearing. "You know what I think?" Maya said, interrupting her own story about getting lost in a Vietnamese market. She looked at James with that direct gaze again. "I think you're someone who's forgotten how to be spontaneous. You've got everything planned out, everything scheduled, everything safe. Am I right?" James wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but he couldn't. She was completely right, and they both knew it. "Is that so bad?" he asked instead. "Not bad," Maya said thoughtfully. "Just limited. Life has this way of happening around you when you're too busy planning it. The best moments, the ones you actually remember, those usually aren't the planned ones. They're the ones that surprise you, the ones that break your routine." She looked at him with those warm, challenging eyes, and James felt something shift inside him. It was small, subtle, like a door opening just a crack to let in a sliver of light, but it was there. "You seem like a good guy, James," Maya continued. "Responsible, reliable, probably great at your job. But when's the last time you did something that scared you a little? When's the last time you said yes to something without knowing exactly how it would turn out?" James thought about it. Really thought about it. And he couldn't remember. Everything in his life was calculated, measured, safe. Even sitting here talking to this stranger felt like the most spontaneous thing he'd done in months. Maybe years. The realization hit him harder than he expected. When had he become this person? This careful, controlled, routine-driven person? There was a time when he'd been different. More open, more willing to take chances. But somewhere along the way, he'd traded spontaneity for security, and he hadn't even noticed it happening. Maya was watching him, that bold smile softening into something more understanding. "I can see you thinking," she said gently. "That's good. Most people don't even want to think about this stuff. They just keep going through the motions day after day until suddenly they wake up and realize they've been asleep for years." "That's kind of terrifying," James admitted. "It is," Maya agreed. "But you know what's more terrifying? Staying asleep. At least if you wake up, you can do something about it." They sat in silence for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, thoughtful. James felt like this stranger understood something about him that even he hadn't fully understood about himself. And instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, he felt relieved, like someone had finally given him permission to acknowledge what he'd been feeling but couldn't quite name. The cafe music changed to something jazzy and upbeat. Someone laughed loudly at a nearby table. The espresso machine hissed and steamed. Life continued around them, but in their little corner something was shifting. James could feel it. This pull towards something different, something unknown. And for the first time in a long time, instead of resisting it, he felt curious about "So," Maya said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "what are you really doing tonight?" And I mean really doing, not just what you plan to do. James glanced at his laptop again at the work he'd intended to finish. The deadline was still there, still real, but suddenly it felt less urgent, less important than this moment sitting across from someone who seemed to understand him better after an hour than most people did after years. This was it, honestly, James said. Work, coffee, maybe head home around 10. Watch something on Netflix. Same as most Friday nights. Maya tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. That's not a Friday night. That's a Tuesday obligation that somehow leaked into your weekend. You know that, right? James couldn't help but laugh. She was right, and the way she said it, so direct but not mean, made it impossible to take offense. Okay, yeah, when you put it that way, it sounds pretty sad. Not sad, Maya corrected. Just incomplete. Like you're living half a life because the other half feels too risky. She paused, then stood up with a sudden decisiveness that caught James off guard. Come with me. What, where? James asked, his first instinct to resist. To stay in his safe corner with his safe plans, does it matter? Maya asked, and there was that bold smile again, challenging him, daring him. Look, you can stay here and work on your laptop. Finish your design, go home, watch TV, and wake up tomorrow having lived a perfectly ordinary Friday night, or... She let the word hang in the air between them. Or, James prompted, his heart beating a little faster. Or you can come with me and have a night you'll actually remember. Your choice, James, no pressure. But I promise you whatever we do will be more interesting than that laptop screen. James looked at his laptop, then at Maya, then back at his laptop. This was crazy. He didn't know this person. He had work to do. He had a routine, but that small door that had cracked open earlier, it was swinging wider now and the light coming through was too bright to ignore. He closed his laptop, unplugged it, and slid it into his bag. Okay, he said, standing up. Let's go. The smile Maya gave him then was worth whatever was about to happen. It was genuine, warm, and somehow proud, like he'd just passed a test he didn't know he was taking. They left the cafe together, stepping out into the cool night air. The city was alive around them, Friday night energy pulsing through the streets. People hurried past, heading to bars or restaurants or shows. Cars honked. Music drifted from open doorways. James had walked these streets hundreds of times, but tonight they felt different. New, full of possibility. Maya didn't explain where they were going. She just started walking and James followed. They moved through the downtown area, past the familiar shops and restaurants James passed every day. But Maya took turns he wouldn't have taken, led him down streets he barely knew existed, showed him parts of his own city that were hidden in plain sight. See that alley? Maya said, pointing to a narrow passage between two buildings. There's a mural back there that's absolutely beautiful. An artist spent 2 months painting it last summer. Most people walk right past and never know it's there. They walk down the alley, and sure enough, covering the entire back wall was this stunning piece of art. Bright colors, intricate details, images of people and nature flowing together in a way that was both chaotic and harmonious. James pulled out his phone and took a picture, already thinking about how he could incorporate some of these color combinations into his design work. You see? Maya said, watching him study the mural. There's so much around us that we miss because we're always rushing somewhere, always focused on the next thing. We forget to just see, and they continued walking. Maya showed him a tiny bookstore he'd never noticed, tucked between a dry cleaner and a convenience store. The place was still open, despite it being nearly 10 o'clock. Inside, books were stacked everywhere, floor to ceiling, organized in what seemed like a completely random system. The owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, greeted Maya like an old friend. You've been here before? James asked. Found it my first week in the city years ago, Maya said, running her fingers along a shelf of vintage photography books. I come here whenever I'm home. Some places just have good energy, you know? They browsed for a while, not really looking for anything specific, just enjoying the feeling of being surrounded by stories. James picked up a book about street photography and flipped through it, fascinated by the raw, candid moments captured in black and white. You should get it, Maya said, noticing his interest. I wasn't planning to buy anything, James started to say, then stopped himself. That was exactly the kind of thinking Maya was trying to shake him out of. You know what? You're right. I should get it. He bought the book, and the smile on Maya's face made it feel like he'd made some important decision, not just purchased something to read. They kept walking, and Maya kept talking. She told him about the jazz club they passed, where she'd once seen an incredible performance by a musician nobody had heard of. She pointed out a small garden hidden behind a fence, visible only through the gaps in the iron bars. She showed him a coffee shop that served pastries from 3 in the morning until noon, a favorite spot for shift workers and insomniacs. "How do you know all this?" James asked. "You said you travel most of the time. How do you know this city better than I do, and I've lived here for 5 years?" Maya shrugged. "I think it's because I don't take places for granted. When I'm somewhere, I really try to be there, to explore it, to understand it. You can live somewhere your whole life and never really see it if you're not paying attention. But if you approach every place like you might not get to come back, you notice more." That philosophy seemed to sum up everything about Maya. She lived like someone who understood that nothing was permanent, that every moment was both precious and fleeting. James realized he'd been living the opposite way, acting like he had infinite time to do the things he wanted to do, to become the person he wanted to be. Always tomorrow, always next year, always someday. Eventually, they ended up at a rooftop bar James had walked past probably 100 times but never entered. The place was packed, music thumping, people dancing and laughing and celebrating the start of the weekend. Maya led him through the crowd to the bar, ordered drinks for both of them without asking what he wanted. And somehow her choice was perfect. They found a spot near the edge of the rooftop, where they could see the city spread out below them. Lights twinkled from buildings and street lamps, creating a constellation of human life. Up here, removed from the streets but still part of the city, everything felt magical in a way James couldn't quite explain. "This is what I love," Maya said, gesturing to the view. "This feeling of being part of something bigger. All those lights down there, each one represents someone's life, someone's story, thousands of people, all living their own experiences, all connected in this strange urban web. It's beautiful when you think about it." James looked at the city with new eyes, seeing what Maya saw. She was right. It was beautiful. He'd been so focused on his small corner of the world that he'd forgotten about the bigger picture, the interconnected nature of everything. They talked for what felt like hours, but also like minutes. Time had stopped making sense. Maya told him more about her travels, about the philosophy that drove her constant movement. She talked about her mother, who'd passed away when Maya was young, and how that loss had shaped her understanding of life's fragility. She spoke with this raw honesty that made James feel like he could be honest too, and he was. He told her things he rarely talked about his father's death 2 years ago, about how it had made him more cautious instead of more adventurous, about the dreams he'd had when he was younger, the creative work he'd wanted to do, the places he'd wanted to see, about how those dreams had slowly gotten buried under bills and responsibilities and the daily grind of adult life. "It's not too late, you know," Maya said softly. "I know everyone says that, and it sounds like empty encouragement. But it's true. The only thing stopping you from changing your life is the decision to keep living it the same way." "That sounds easy when you say it," James replied. "But there are bills to pay, responsibilities to handle. I can't just drop everything and travel the world like you do." "I'm not saying you have to do what I do," Maya said. "I'm saying you have to do what you want to do. Maybe that's travel. Maybe it's something else. But whatever it is, you have to stop using safety as an excuse to avoid living." Her words hit hard because they were true. James had been using his responsible, stable life as a shield against risk, against uncertainty, against the possibility of failure or loss. But in protecting himself from those things, he'd also protected himself from joy, from adventure, from the feeling he was experiencing right now. Standing on a rooftop with a near stranger who somehow felt like the most honest person he'd talked to in years. The night deepened around them. The rooftop bar started to empty as people headed to their next destination or went home. Maya suggested they walk some more, and James agreed without hesitation. His old self would have worried about the time, about getting enough sleep, about tomorrow's plans. But that version of James felt distant now, like someone he used to be rather than who he was in this moment. They walked through. The streets had emptied considerably by the time James and Maya found themselves walking along the river that cut through the city. The water reflected the lights from the buildings on either side, creating a shimmering path that seemed almost magical in the pre-dawn darkness. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete walkway, the only sound besides the gentle lap of water against the shore. James couldn't remember the last time he'd been out this late. Or early, depending on how you looked at it. His whole body was tired, but his mind was wide awake, buzzing with everything he'd seen and talked about over the past few hours. It felt like he'd lived more tonight than in the past 6 months combined. They reached a bridge, one of those old stone ones that had been there forever, connecting one side of the city to the other. Maya stopped in the middle of it, leaning against the railing and looking out at the water. James stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Can I tell you something?" Maya asked, her voice quieter than it had been all night. The bold confidence that had defined her earlier had softened into something more vulnerable. "Of course," James said, turning to look at her. "My mom died when I was 19, Maya said, her eyes still on the water. "Car accident. Completely random. She went to the grocery store one afternoon and never came home. And the thing that haunted me for years after was thinking about all the normal stuff she did that day. Not knowing it was her last day, she probably worried about stupid things. She probably rushed around, stressed about work or bills or whatever, and none of it mattered because she was just gone." James didn't say anything. He could tell Maya needed to share this, and anything he said would feel inadequate anyway. So he just listened, being present in the way she'd been present for him earlier. "After she died, everyone expected me to fall apart," Maya continued. "And I did for a while. But then something shifted. I realized that I didn't want to live the way she had to live. Always putting things off, always waiting for the right time that never came. I wanted to really live, like actually live, while I still could. That's when I started traveling. That's when I decided that comfort and safety weren't worth it, if they meant missing out on actually experiencing life." She turned to look at James then, and he could see tears in her eyes, though she was smiling through them. "People think I travel because I'm running from something. Maybe I was at first, but now I'm running toward things. Toward experiences, toward connections, toward life itself. I'm trying to honor her by not wasting the time I have." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. He understood what Maya was saying on a level that surprised him. His father's death had affected him differently, had made him more cautious, more afraid. But maybe Maya's approach made more sense. Maybe the right way to honor loss was to embrace life more fully, not to retreat from it. "I get it," James said quietly. "When my dad died, I went the opposite direction. I got more careful, more controlled. I think I was trying to prevent more loss by not letting anything unpredictable into my life. But all I really did was stop living." "Past tense?" Maya asked, raising an eyebrow. "You stopped living, or you've stopped living?" James thought about it. Was he still that person? After tonight, could he go back to that way of being? The answer came to him quickly. "I think I'm trying to figure out how to start again." "Good," Maya said, her bold smile returning. "Because that guy I met in the cafe, he was half asleep. But the guy standing here right now, he's awake. I like him better." They stood there on the bridge as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The darkness that had wrapped around the city for hours was starting to lift, replaced by that strange in-between light where night was ending but day hadn't quite begun. James felt like he was in an in-between place himself, caught between who he'd been and who he might become. "I need to tell you something too," Maya said, her expression becoming more serious. "I'm leaving the city in 3 days. I'm going to Peru for 4 months. I bought the ticket last week." The words landed in James's chest like a physical weight. 3 days, of course. Of course she was leaving. People like Maya didn't stay in one place. That was her whole thing, her whole philosophy. He'd known this couldn't last, this connection they'd formed. But hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way he wasn't prepared for. 3 days, James repeated, processing the information. Part of him wanted to ask why she'd even approached him if she was leaving so soon. But he knew the answer. Maya lived in the moment. She didn't avoid connections just because they'd be temporary. That would go against everything she believed. 3 days, Maya confirmed. She watched his face carefully, gauging his reaction. "I debated whether to tell you. I didn't want to make this weird or put pressure on these last few days. But I also didn't want to lie or pretend. That's not who I am." "I'm glad you told me," James said, and he meant it. Even though the news hurt, even though it complicated everything, he appreciated her honesty. It was better than wondering. better than hoping for something that was never going to happen. They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding what this meant but neither quite ready to say it out loud. Then Maya turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "So here's what I want to know," she said, her voice strong and clear in the quiet morning air. "What are you going to do with these 3 days? Are you going to play it safe and pull back because you know it's temporary? Or are you going to take a risk and see where this goes, even knowing it has an expiration date?" James looked at her, at this incredible person who'd walked into his life just hours ago and already turned it upside down. Every logical part of his brain was telling him to protect himself, to thank her for an interesting night and go back to his normal life. Getting more involved with someone who was leaving in 3 days was asking for heartbreak. But another part of him, a part he'd been ignoring for too long, was saying something different. This part was reminding him of everything Maya had said about really living, about embracing experiences even when they were temporary, about not letting fear keep you from connection. This part was telling him that some things were worth the risk, worth the pain that might come later, because the alternative was to miss out on something real. James made his decision. He pulled Maya closer and kissed her, pouring everything he felt into that moment, all his fear and hope and newfound courage, all his gratitude for this strange and wonderful night, all his determination to be braver than he'd been. Maya kissed him back, her hands coming up to his face, holding him there like he was something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling and crying at the same time. The sun was starting to peek over the buildings, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The city was waking up around them, starting a new day, and James felt like he was waking up too. "So that's your answer?" Maya asked, though her smile said she already knew. "That's my answer," James confirmed. 3 days might not be a long time, but let's make them count." Maya laughed, bright and genuine, and hugged him tight. "Okay then. 3 days. Let's see how much living we can fit into them." They walked back through the city as dawn broke fully, holding hands, making plans for the limited time they had. James knew this was probably crazy. He knew he was setting himself up for heartbreak in 3 days. But for the first time in years, he felt fully alive, fully present, fully himself, and that feeling was worth whatever pain might come later. Saturday morning arrived with barely 2 hours of sleep between them. James had finally made it home around 5, collapsed into bed, and was jolted awake by his phone buzzing at 7. He groaned, reaching for it with one arm while keeping his eyes closed, hoping it was just a notification he could ignore. But it was a text from Maya, just an address and a message. "Meet me here at 8. Bring coffee and an open mind." James smiled despite his exhaustion. He dragged himself out of bed, showered quickly, and threw on jeans and a hoodie. The person he'd been just yesterday would never have done this. That person would have slept in, caught up on work, maintained his routine. But that person was gone, or at least taking a back seat for the next 3 days. He arrived at the address Maya had sent with 2 cups of coffee, not knowing which she preferred but hoping the simple black coffee he'd gotten would work. Maya was already there, waiting outside what looked like a pottery studio. She was wearing paint-stained overalls and had her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked beautiful in that effortless way some people had. "You came," she said, taking one of the coffees gratefully. "Of course I came," James replied, "though I'll admit I have no idea what we're doing at a pottery studio at 8 in the morning." Maya's eyes lit up with that mischievous spark he was starting to recognize. "I've always wanted to try pottery. Like always. But I've never been in one place long enough to take a real class. So I called this place last night, and they have a weekend workshop thing. We're signed up for the beginner session." "We're making pottery?" James asked, both amused and slightly nervous. "I should tell you, I'm terrible at art, like genuinely bad." "Perfect," Maya said, already heading toward the door. "That means you can't take yourself too seriously. Come on." The next 3 hours were a complete mess in the best possible way. The instructor, a patient woman in her 50s named Rita, tried her best to teach them the basics. How to center the clay on the wheel, how to use gentle pressure to shape it, how to keep it from wobbling out of control. James was, as predicted, absolutely terrible at it. His first attempt at making a bowl ended up looking like a sad, lopsided hat. His second try wasn't much better. But Maya wasn't much better either, and that was the beautiful part. They both struggled, laughed at their failures, got clay absolutely everywhere. James's hands were covered in the stuff. His clothes had splatter marks, and there was even somehow clay in his hair. and he couldn't remember the last time he'd had this much fun. "Look at this," Maya said, holding up her latest creation, which was supposed to be a vase but looked more like a twisted tree trunk. "It's abstract art." "That's one way to describe it." James laughed, working on his own piece, which wasn't shaping up much better. Rita came over to help them, her experienced hands guiding theirs, showing them how to feel the clay, how to work with it instead of against it. "Pottery teaches patience," she said. "You can't force it. You have to let it become what it wants to become." James thought there was probably some deeper life lesson in that, but he was having too much fun to think about it too deeply. He was just enjoying the moment, enjoying the feeling of creating something with his hands, enjoying the sight of Maya covered in clay and laughing like a kid. By the end of the session, they'd each managed to create one piece that was at least recognizable as an intentional object. James had made a small bowl that was actually pretty decent, though it leaned slightly to one side. Maya had crafted a mug that was a bit lumpy but had character. Rita promised to fire them and have them ready for pickup in a week. "I won't be here in a week," Maya said, and for just a moment the joy dimmed from her expression. "I can pick both up," James offered. "I'll keep yours safe until you're back, whenever that is." Maya squeezed his hand, grateful for the gesture even if they both knew it was unlikely she'd ever collect the mug. They left the studio covered in clay, exhausted and ridiculously happy. They found a cafe nearby and ordered breakfast, barely caring that they were making a mess of the booth with their clay-covered clothes. The other customers gave them curious looks, but James didn't care. He was too busy listening to Maya tell stories about other random classes she'd taken during her travels. A cooking class in Thailand where she'd accidentally made the spiciest curry the instructor had ever tasted. A tango lesson in Argentina, where she'd stepped on her partner's feet so many times he'd politely suggested she stick to watching. A surfing lesson in Australia that had ended with her getting knocked over by wave after wave but refusing to give up. "You just try everything, don't you?" James asked, genuinely amazed. "Aren't you ever afraid of being bad at something?" "Of course," Maya said, stealing a piece of bacon from his plate. "I'm bad at lots of things. But being bad at something is how you get better. And even if you never get better, at least you tried. At least you have the story." After breakfast, they borrowed bikes from a rental station and spent the afternoon riding through the city. No destination, no plan, just following whatever street looked interesting. They stopped at random food trucks, trying different cuisines. They found a park and lay in the grass watching clouds drift by. They took pictures of things that caught their eye. A mural, a flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk, an old man feeding pigeons. Maya showed James how she saw the world through her photographer's eyes, how to notice light and shadow, how to find beauty in unexpected places. She'd grab his hand and pull him over to see something she'd spotted, the way sunlight filtered through tree leaves, the expression on a child's face as they chased bubbles, the patterns created by shadows on a building wall. "You're good at this," Maya said, looking at a photo James had taken of an elderly woman sitting on a bench, afternoon light streaming through the trees behind her. The image captured something true and beautiful about the moment. "At what?" James asked, pleased by the compliment but not quite believing it. "At seeing things. At being present. You just needed someone to remind you how." Maya looked at him with those warm eyes, and James felt seen in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. They kept riding, kept exploring, kept discovering pieces of the city James had never noticed despite living there for years. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they found themselves at a lookout point on a hill overlooking the entire city. They sat on their bikes, slightly out of breath from the climb, taking in the view. "This is what I want you to remember," Maya said softly. "This feeling right now. This sense of possibility and adventure. Don't let it fade when I leave. Don't go back to living on autopilot." "I won't," James promised, hoping it was true. "Promise me," Maya insisted, turning to face him. "Promise me you'll keep trying new things. That you'll say yes more than you say no. That you'll take risks and be brave and really live your life." "I promise," James said, and he meant it.